back on the Zero Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. My next guest is an artist, a photojournalist, and a multimedia reporter, and she focuses on society's impact on the natural world as well as on social injustice. Both topics, of course, very close to our hearts here on the show. And she recently wrote an article in DSMOG, which is a very good publication, DESMOG, smog.com, with an eye-catching headline. And the headline is this: Biden's call to increase LNG, that's liquid natural gas, export capacity on Gulf Coast, it's long, so bear with me, is tantamount to Sarah Palin's call to drill, baby, drill, according to environmental advocates. So first of all, Julie Dermansky, welcome to the Zero Hour.
Well, thanks for having me and for reading out my long title, because it is a mouthful, but it's a real equivalent. And part of the issues revolving all reporting and dealing with all things oil and gas are that there are so many complicated terms that you don't even know what you're reading or writing about when you go fast. Like, you had to pause for a minute and explain what LNG is, which was very good of you, because people take for granted that and we just read through these things sometimes, the acronyms in our culture. I have to admit, I have to look up some of the short ones for texting because I'm a little older than I look. So,
I've had to, of course, I'm not older than I look. I look as old as I am, but I've had to look up some of those too. But it also says, Julie, why don't we just start by talking about journalism a little bit, because we both do journalism. We both do journalism that, let's face it, has a point of view. But each of us kind of finds their own mix. First of all, journalism, a lot of times you're right, it seems to operate on buzzwords, like everybody's supposed to know what LNG means, or I remember when the Iraq War started, all of a sudden every news outlet was talking about CENTCOM. And I was like, what's CENTCOM? It's like all of a sudden you're supposed to know. And, it's almost like insiders talking to each other instead of journalists reporting to people. And I guess well, first of all, did you write that headline or did it to you?
I wrote that headline. I was actually a little surprised it didn't get changed, because it's provocative, but that's the essence of what expanding the LNG facilities export is. And I'm not sure most people get it. Like natural gas. Yes, gas is natural and it's mixed with methane. There's all these complications. Where do we get it? Where does it come from? So do people know that you have to frack a bunch of wells, and then first you drill them, then you frack them, then you produce the gas that comes up, and you take some things out, put things in, and then you move it by pipeline or by trains that can blow up and all these things. And then it gets to these facilities, and then another process happens to it that also requires energy, so it can get on ships. And all along the way, it's leaking methane. And that's another thing people hear about. Well, what's methane? And it's the main component of natural gas. So it all gets so terribly complicated that no one knows what you're talking about. And then politicians and industry lobbyists who feed them their language to feed to us start talking about how it's a clean energy and that this is a good thing. And it's the exact opposite. And then the timing of everything is so bizarre that the year starts with people talking about another acronym, carbon capture sequestration. So you were hearing about CCS. I'm sure you have, maybe some others haven't, but it was in Biden's talking points, it's industry talking points, blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, CCS. And these things all are tied to the fossil fuel industry, but reporters often don't connect the two. Like, how many times do you see a story about expanding LNG now tied to saving Ukraine with climate change? Like, put all those things together. You can't separate them.
Right.
So that's a lot.
Oh, it's 100% true. And, I think a lot of our colleagues love to use buzzwords, it makes them sound authoritative. And I don't mean to be too rough on them. I guess, well, maybe I do. But, so these buzzwords are thrown around. As you point out, a lot of them are actually crafted by the industry.
And that's a key point.
And yeah, for sure. I mean, and even, I don't know if this one was crafted or not, but even the phrase natural gas, it sounds like, well, natural, like organic. Like
it's terrible. Yeah. Yeah.
And what it is, what people don't realize, what your article, illustrates is it's a highly industrial process, as you just described, and it has major environmental impact, even when things go well. And when they don't go well, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when they don't go well, even worse. And then you start to hear all these things about, as you say, about climate change. It was really interesting, Julie. I was reading several weeks ago about, I can't remember if it was blue hydrogen or green hydrogen.
Right. See again.
It was something in the Biden proposal, exactly what you talked about, that this was great for the climate, that we're going to do this. And somebody did a study and found that it was actually worse for climate change than, alternatives that are already bad. But, who knows that? Because we get this word cloud, this word salad. And
exactly. And one way to take some steam out of that argument too is what one of my friends in industry, what carbon capture is, and then I'll explain what sequestration is carbon capture is capturing the carbon as it's escaping from the production of things like natural gas that we use. And then they would capture it, then they need more infrastructure, they being the fossil fuel industry, and they plan to inject it into wells under the ground, which they don't know if it will come out or not come out. But long story short, connected to that is, if industry wants to try to go that route, we're going to pay for it. Now, why is that? So I'd rather not argue about that. It could potentially be good. So if they really want to try that and take their bottom line and lose their profits and go a little bit in that direction, I don't want to argue about that, but I want to question, where is your tax dollar and my tax dollar? Why is it going to develop that when there are proven ways to move forward to create other ways to have our energy produced that won't destroy the planet in that capacity? So it's very frustrating. I lost you, Richard. If I can pontificate a little on the terminology again, it comes back to, I mentioned that to get rid of the carbon capture, the pollution, by injecting it into injection wells, that comes back to the whole fracking industry and the confusion we were talking about years ago about earthquakes and were they caused by fracking or not fracking, and again, that's the language issue. I refer to fracking as the fracking industry because there are all kinds of things involved with, once you frack, how you get the productive oil and gas from the fracked well to the marketplace. And there's all this wastewater, and that's what was being injected under the ground. And while fracking wells can cause earthquakes in some areas, that wasn't the bigger issue. The bigger issue was the injection of the produced oil, and that was mostly in Oklahoma. So I don't want to diminish the areas where there have been earthquakes caused by an individual or a group of fracked wells, but again, that leads back to the whole confusion of language. So then,
and about that, I think you can hear me now, right?
Yeah, I can. Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to keep it going.
And about all of this, actually, Julie, it's such a great point that we're expected to pay for it. Some of this technology is so complicated and precariously designed, it seems to me, and I've tried to.
It's so wonderful you're bringing that up.
Yeah, it's like Wile E. Coyote's rocket-powered Roadrunner catcher, except we're supposed to subsidize the Acme company, and building.
Well, you just nailed it. The industry's even referring to it as that. I covered.
Oh, really?
Yes. And all along the Gulf Coast, this is where we need to keep our eyes if you're following the climate crisis and whether we're going to stop it or not. Watch the Gulf Coast from Louisiana to Corpus Christi. It's wild coyote. Yeah. And you hear also not only carbon capture, you hear, oh, well, we're going to use the best available science and capturing technology. Well, so you build a new plant like the Exxon Sabic plant, which is Gulf Coast Solutions or something. Again, all these names that sound okay, but it's Gulf Coast. Exxon and Sabic, which is a country from Saudi Arabia, and they make this huge petrochemical plant. And again, well, how does that relate to LNG? I'll go there in a second. But anyway, the plant starts operating, and it's putting out all kinds of pollution just at the get-go, just like the venture LNG plant that I wrote about. New plants, in my view, I'm definitely not an expert on how brand new facilities should operate, but I'm going to say I don't think they're supposed to have so many incidents and problems. If you build something to your plans and your plans were right, it should work right. If you build something right and there are problems, maybe it wasn't built right, maybe the plans weren't right. And, like you're saying, then on top of that, we're investing in these companies making completely new technology. And that clock for saving life on this planet as we know it is ticking way faster than I think people realize. That's a whole other thing. First, I want to make the connection between petrochemical and LNG, and then we'll go back to the discussion. But when you hear petrochemical and you hear LNG, you have to think fracking and natural gas, because both of those industries are fed by the production of natural gas. And when you hear natural gas, you have to think methane, because that's the part of gas that escapes in the production and moving it from the well to your house or to wherever it's going. Oh, with the other place being petrochemical plants that make the plastic that we all have become addicted to because it's everywhere. Right. And so those two industries are going like gangbuster here on the Gulf Coast. Foreign companies are coming here because we have plentiful natural gas, which is not as plentiful as people think. There's not an endless supply, and that's another great word we're going to start hearing more and more of, which is stranded assets. So not only are we, the public, going to help underwrite these projects, and while we're hearing about jobs, when the gas runs out, there's stranded assets, which is all of the infrastructure that has to be made for the export. And look, Exxon executives and other oil and gas executives, they were just at the House Capitol hearing yesterday about why they have record-breaking profits and are they gouging us at the pumps or not? And, they can say what they want. It's no one's holding anybody accountable for such things. So, it's kind of like money that just evaporates and, could be wind farms, could be, helping everyone insulate their house, solar panels. Again, I'm not an expert on that either, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
That part of it too, in all of these conversations, I'm always, when we have these increasingly elaborate, expensive, dangerous schemes to extract more and more energy. It's like, well, how about we use less energy? How about we...
Well, you're not allowed to talk about that.
Yeah, it's like...
That's what cost people elections, apparently. I think it was Naomi Klein during a session at Climate Covering Now brought up that when Jimmy Carter mentioned we could wear our sweaters in the 70s and cut down on heat, he lost the election. That was it for him. So we don't even have to have that conversation. And that's I'm not saying it's wrong. It's definitely correct. But the problem is when the bigger parts of our society move us in the wrong direction, you taking personal responsibility isn't changing that. Finding...
And just
sorry. I know you're not.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm really talking about is not, to me, the
Sorry.
whole issue of quote unquote personal responsibility in environmental and climate change issues is a diversion.
You got it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, me recycling. I mean, it's, it's good, but, me separating my trash so that, Tony Soprano's company can take it to the right places.
Yeah, it might not be good. Yeah.
It's not the same as it's not the same as insisting that corporations do the things differently, that packaging not be so elaborate and expensive, and that things be reusable, and this is a corporate problem.
Well, yeah, it comes back to what you're talking about, this new technology. Then I'm going to tie it exactly back to what you're saying. It's the whole role of the government, and there's a twofold issue we're looking at. One is, as new things are being built, whether they're new experimental things like blue hydrogen and CCS, or these new LNG plants and new petrochemical plants. And if you read the headlines in the business page, it's always like the biggest one ever, or the biggest this. So it's all a bit new. Well, where are our regulators? Are we suddenly having a huge job fair for joining, who's regulating the pipelines, who's regulating the design, who's regulating the air, who's looking at the air monitoring? Do we have more people at the EPA? Do we have more? We do not. There are less and less regulators out in the field. And then it comes back to, okay, recycle. Well, where are the laws? Where are the standards? And that's the government's role in this. Now, if the government is controlled by the petrochemical industry and the natural gas industry, because we allow all these PACs to get all this money, this is where we get, there's unlimited money flowing in to help support politicians that keep this language going. So we're really stuck going in the wrong direction. And so yeah, you recycling is not going to change that. And I'm not going to tell you not to recycle, but there's some systemic problems where corporations have way too big of a say. And that's what's helping us move quick in the wrong direction. I tell people now, if you hear, we're transitioning to net zero in 2050 using the best available science, that's when you got to call, I don't know if you're allowed to use the B word, bullshit. I think that one comes up. That's what it means. And so whether you understand all the other terminology or not, that's when you just, like a light bulb, I want people to start thinking. Like, that's when you're like, wait a minute, because we're not 2050. How many of us are going to be here? I mean, lots of people on the planet, but you, me, we're not going to be here. The people that are saying that, best available science, according to which scientists? Scientists that...
Who pays the scientists that make that, and who gives them their assignments, what to study? It seems to me that systemically, Julie, I'm trying to keep count of all the issues, but there's the regulatory capture, there's the political capture, there's the search for more ways to profitably produce energy rather than reduce energy use. There's the competence issue that you brought up of design and or construction of these facilities. And at the end, at the receiving end of all of these systemic failures, are people like the people you were writing about in this article, the people of the Gulf Coast. It seems the Gulf Coast, Louisiana, and neighboring, coastal regions. It seems like that's an epicenter for environmental exploitation, and that people there are, I don't know if they're our future for the rest of the country or if they're just being hit especially hard, but they're certainly being hit by all of this, aren't they?
Well, yeah, and it's the science of climate science. I mean, the IPCC, and you can see out the whole title, the climate studies and reporting that all come together to make up that report have warned which zones of the planet are going to see the worst impacts first. And that is the Gulf Coast is one. The temperatures rise in the Gulf, and that impacts weather. So it's not weather change and people say, oh, well, it was cold or it was hot. It's about climate. And if you change the climate, it changes weather patterns and weather, and you get more extreme rain and faster accelerating storms. That's the thing on the coast. And those same very extreme storms, they are going to hit these facilities. And, the people get moved out. Then there's no one even to tell you what's happening at the facilities and call it in. So I meet this couple that have already had to give up, where they grew up, which is the Ile-de-Jean-Charles Island, which is one of the fastest eroding areas on the planet. And that is not completely climate change. That's the other, quick reporting, climate change. There are climate refugees. That island is eroding so quickly because the oil and gas industry, like the logging industry, made all kinds of channels from the Gulf through the wetlands, and it brings salt water in, which causes erosion. And, I'm going so fast in the talking, and you're great at pulling out all of the points. Another point is that everything's connected. And that's a huge problem we have, because everything gets so myopic. And would it surprise people to know that, some of the orphaned wells that you might have heard there's money for us to plug them because some of them are leaking methane, and prisoners are being used. They're not necessarily creating jobs. They're hiring companies that are contracting from prison labor. So that's a whole other, I just throw that in there to show.
No, Julie, that's so important that, in fact, as we've been talking about this, Julie Dermansky, I've been thinking about how similar it is, so structurally, or however you want to put it, to the way we deal with the banks. They talk about privatized profits, socialized risk, and that kind of thing, that, we encourage the banks we, meaning the government, pass laws to allow them to behave recklessly and destructively, to rescue them from the consequences of their own actions. Regulators are captured by the industry. Big pharma, we pay the costs for discovering new drugs, and then privatize the profits, and people die. And, you mentioned the prison,
privatized prisons. Oh boy.
So it's all of a piece. It's all part of a broken system, which gets to another issue I wanted to bring up with you, which is, how to report on this. You clearly have clear and strong views about it. And, sometimes we're told we're supposed to keep a veneer of objectivity. One of the things about your work that I think is really effective is the photojournalism. And this piece, again, I won't read the whole title, Biden's call to increase LNG export capacity, but, the pictures, including the house on stilts destroyed by Hurricane Laura and storm damaged cemetery, as well as, of course, people involved. And on your website, you have a lot of, images of environmental damage. And it's, when we write words, somebody can always say, well, they're biased or whatever. It's kind of hard to argue with an image, that's right.
Well,
so how do you, I guess the question is, how do you navigate that whole, journalism versus advocacy thing? We're talking about the planet, we're talking about survival and all that. I struggle with that all the time. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, there's so many things altogether. When I do meet with people from people who are frontline, I hate to use the word victims, but victims to this expanding industry, or being on the front lines of the climate crisis, if I'm going to write about them and feature them, I let them know my point of view, but I tell them, because a lot of them on the Gulf Coast have an opposite point of view that I do. I like to be upfront with them, and I say, look, my personal beliefs are probably way to the left of yours, but my reporting only deals with facts. I elevate what people say. I use their words to help me illustrate information that I want to get out to people. but yeah, my photo point of view may be definitely more, what I choose to take pictures of maybe is more direct that. But what a lot of reporting, most reporting is, since most people don't even have the time to get too deep in, is he said, she said,
Right.
something about what you're writing about, and the end. And if you read most reports now, it will end with industry or what the government says. And I like to end with a but or what the person being negatively impacted had to say. But, if you give me the he said, she said, and either one of the he said or she said says something that is not factual, I don't just put that in my story. I choose it, if it's wrong, to put in my story to explain what's wrong with it.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the difference in my reporting. As far as the images go, before I was reporting, I was a fine artist for 20 years. So I was a painter and a sculptor, and I was in my studio creating things out in the field or whatever. And I was responding to all my own thoughts and all my own creative stuff and making stuff that way. So I kind of developed my own visual vocabulary. So when I'm out in the field taking pictures, I don't just grab the first thing I can get and focus and move on. I look for icons, archetypes, and that's where my creative plate comes in. I went into photojournalism, and I found frustration with some of the reporting because people come from all over to tell stories, and you read stuff that's wrong. And now what happens, and a lot of people don't know that, is someone does original reporting, and then other media sites jump on that and they'll re-report on it. So if there's a mistake, that same mistake gets repeated and repeated and repeated. And I was seeing that with the BP oil spill, and that was when I started writing more, and I got kind of sucked in. And one interesting thing that happened for me, and what inspired that report, besides all the stuff about climate and the relation to the expansion of the LNG export and the petrochemical industry, is that hearing. There was a public hearing that I went to, and I illustrate that, I'd like to say, in kind of like a Law and Order kind of way, back and forth, what the arguments are. And I try to go to those as often as I can. First of all, very few people are aware of when they're going to happen. That specific hearing, unless you are following, getting an email announcements from the regulator, or knew how to navigate their site, you wouldn't have known about that hearing. So the people that showed up at that hearing were environmental advocates that do follow such things and put out some announcements about it, and a few locals that support industry, and one local who's involved in the fight against such things. And so it was a very specific group of people. So I told the story a bit through their pro and con critique of the regulatory hearing for that monstrously large facility that will have a huge impact. Even if you weren't concerned with climate, if you use that area to go birding, it's one of the great places in the country where you can take pictures of migratory birds or to fish. It's helping put an end to that. So there's so many levels. But one of the things that struck me at the hearing, there I am, I'm filming the hearings to make sure to have the sound bites so I can report on everything accurately, and shooting photos and listening, were people saying that they didn't have time to adequately comment against the problems in the permit, because it's 850 pages, a permit application, I mean. And I think it was online for about a month or so, if you knew where to find it. And 850 pages of technical reading. I don't know how much time that would take you.
It's wild. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how do you do it? And then if you, I found out about the hearing personally 2 days before it, and I'm a reporter. And, it was a rare thing. Another reporter from Inside Climate News was there, and I think a local reporter as well. That almost never happens, but LNG is in the news. So it was great to see another colleague there, because that's the other thing. Sometimes I'll see, oh my goodness, there's going to be this hearing. And if I don't go, then there's no one recording it, because in Louisiana, they don't, they do put out a transcript eventually, but they're not filmed, or they're filmed, but it's not like a Zoom thing where you can go and see this stuff easily. So anyway, after the hearing ended, I thought, I'm going to write something about this and make sure people who are concerned with climate know that they can comment. And by the time I digested everything, the hearing was on a Thursday. On Monday, I was ready to start writing. The period was closed. And I was like, oops.
That's how they win sometimes, right?
And I asked the regulator, though, why, if it was done or why. And it was officially closed. I did get one thing saying it was closed. And he said, we're still debating, not debating, that wasn't his word. It still hasn't been decided. And I kept pestering. And a week later, they opened it. So I'm sorry, I want to let you finish, but I wanted to, that for me was interesting. I wanted the why.
Sure.
Why is it closed? Why would it matter to keep it open another month? And they opened it another 2 weeks, but the notice makes it seem like it was open a whole month. So people have until the 12th of April to comment.
Well, okay. Well, good to know. And, they're under a lot of pressure from private industry and not from everybody else. So that's why they're pushing them. But if you have I know you're pressed for time, but if you have a minute before you go, I don't want to leave out President Biden's role in all
yeah, please. Now, and you can keep me going. I clearly have lots to say.
Because, that's in your headline, obviously, his call to increase LNG capacity. Environmentalists say, advocates say, is like drill, baby, drill. And of course, we are using climate concern to push this, or he is, I should say, Ukraine, energy independence and all this to push this, even though most of the energy we produce is exported anyway. But so any comments on that?
Well, exactly. It comes back to what we were talking about with the twisting of the language. You're not hearing Biden say, let's frack more, and it's the other weird things that, you'll hear is, even as he moves us in the wrong direction, on us. And when I say us, I don't mean advocates who are for or against the use of fossil fuel. I mean us as people who use the planet and are impacted by climate. Like you might not have needed sunblock years back, and now you do, or you'll get sunburned because, anyway, I digress. But I'm focused on that. This requires more drilling. Where do you get the natural gas to export? Where do you get the natural gas to make more plastic, which is a different topic. But then on the other side, the industry lobbyists are going to bring up the small things that he's done to slow things down, which it doesn't slow things down. It just perhaps slows even more expansion, which is curtailing fracking on some federal land, or from more leasing in the Gulf of Mexico. And again, you don't even, with so many levels, or people, oh my goodness, the best one is saying that we have to open the Keystone XL pipeline, which isn't, the northern route of it isn't built, and that's going to somehow solve the problem. I beg to differ that TransCanada, which is now what TC Energy, even wants the northern route, because they ended up getting the southern route of that pipeline that connects to their network, which most people also don't know about, because the activists like to tell you that they won the fight to kill the Keystone XL, which is incorrect. They killed the northern route of the Keystone XL pipeline. That's a huge project that was cut into multiple pieces, when in fact the company only needed, in my view, the southern route to connect to their network, so that they can move tar sands oil, which is a very dirty oil, to process so that it can be used from Canada to the Gulf and exported out as well. Again, not our energy independence that you're told. So, but back to Biden, you have to remember that the Obama administration, with Hillary as Secretary of State and Biden as Vice President, were incredibly pro-fracking. And they were the ones that helped push this idea that natural gas was a bridge fuel, which it never was. It burns cleaner, but what you gain with that type of clean energy, you lose in the whole movement from the well site where it's been fracked to production to wherever. And it's even worse for the climate potentially than using coal, because methane it's more destructive to the atmosphere. And, if you want to read easier explanations or easier, I didn't explain exactly the science, but Michael Mann is one scientist that writes in a way that explains some of this stuff pretty well. Or, there are other writers too that if you start understanding it, it begins to make sense to you. But he's not a climate hero. Again, what you get the indicators, best available science.
Right. Yeah.
Net zero 50 years from now, give me a break.
Thanks for that. So all the people take away from this, and I hope they take away a lot more, but is, these trigger warnings that come with best available science, 50-year goal or whatever, means somebody's probably BSing, then we'll have done our job as journalists today, Julie. So again, thanks so much. My guest and Julie Dermansky, journalist and photojournalist. Her latest piece in D-Smog is, I won't read the whole title, but Search for Biden's Call to Increase LNG Capacity. Sarah Palin, Drill Baby Drill. If you search those things together, you'll find it. I encourage you to read it. So thanks for writing it, Julie, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me. And if people want to comment, there's a link in the report, to the government about the permit application from this plant. They have till April 12th. And the explanations there, you'll see a hot link in the story.
All right, we'll try to put that in the YouTube of this discussion as well. So thanks again, Julie.
Thanks for having me.
And
Bye.
We'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.